dare make fun of Brittany after all she's been through.
I'm your number one fan.
All you people care about is readers and making money off of her. She's a human!
I'm also a man of heart and blood and soul. Heart and blood and soul. Heart and blood and soul.
Born for you bastards!
Heart and blood and soul. Heart and blood and soul. Heart and blood and soul.
God, I love you.
Hello and welcome to Devotee, the show where we talk to the creators we love about the stuff that they love. I'm Mariam Blythe, and with me, as always, except for last episode when I was sick and he was flying solo, is Lucas Testro. Testro, how are you doing?
I'm good, Marion. I was here. It was you who weren't here last episode.
Who are we chatting with today, Lucas?
Well, this episode's an exciting one, Marion, because for the first time, someone who was one of our past guests' pick as their favourite creator is now himself joining us to talk about one of his favourite creators. He's a filmmaker, a musician, a comic creator, an animator, even a screenwriter, and no doubt a whole lot more. And he does each of those things in his own very distinctive, unconventional personal style. Comedian Damien Lawler was a huge fan of him, and now we are too. Cory McAbee, welcome to Devotee.
Hey, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure.
So we, in Lucas's intro, he kind of went through all the different things that you do. How do you actually describe your job? Like, what does your passport say that you do?
It doesn't say too much. I do a lot of different things, and sometimes it could be a little bit, a little bit of a. It's a bit difficult when you do too much stuff. Trying to describe it, you sound like an idiot. Like if your daughter came home and said, "Oh, he draws and he paints and he acts and he writes," and you'd be like, "Oh God, no,"
Was that your dream when you were a kid, that you would grow up to do this, or did you have a different goal?
I didn't have any. I was convinced that I was an idiot, when I was a kid.
But every kid wants to be something. I think my brother wanted to be a fire truck, not a fireman. A fire truck.
Well, he should be. He still can. I was joking with my wife recently. She was talking about a friend of ours who's a lawyer and he hates it. And she said, "Well, he chose to do this when he was a teenager, and now he's in his mid-30s, and he's living a choice that he made when he was 16 or 17 and he had to commit to it. You get out of high school, and then you take your summer off, and then you go to college, and then you study, and then you get a job at a law firm, and you pass the bar, and eventually, you're a lawyer in your mid-30s going, what the hell am I doing here? And I told her, I said, if I stuck to what I wanted to do when I was 16, you'd be married to a mime.
It is so strange that you're supposed to make massive choices about your entire life at the age of 17, because like if you had to keep all the other things from when you were 17, like your haircut, your taste in music and all that kind of
signature
stuff, you would be in a serious amount of trouble.
Yeah, it's like making children choose a tattoo design for their face.
I don't actually believe that's true, though. Speaking as somebody who did used to be a lawyer, I mean, we have a slightly different system here. Well, historically we did, where you didn't leave with the kinds of college debt that I understand people rack up in the States, Cory. But these days that debt's getting higher. But I think you choose that every single day of your life. I mean, I got to 30 and decided that wasn't... Well, actually... Earlier than that, I decided that I didn't want to be, a lawyer in private practice, and went to a TV company and was working there, and then got to 30 and decided I didn't want to be in administration there, and I wanted to make films, and quit and lived what I think was all my friends' dream, that I was off back at uni going to film school and making stuff. Meanwhile, like I was totally poor, and every time we went to restaurants, like everyone would be talking about how cool my life was, while they're like saying, let's split the bill, and I'm panicking because I've had salad and water the entire night. But I think we make that choice for ourselves. I think it's very easy to rationalize we have no choice to avoid hard decisions.
I think, it's an individual thing. Like you what you did, you were free to make those changes. He's got a lot of kids now, and he also in the U.S., like you said, he's got tons of bills just from going to school. Like it's a racket. They try to. In fact, if you claim bankruptcy, they'll clear all of your debts except for your student loans.
Wow.
And also, you guys, if you have medical there, and that's another thing too that's tied in with people's work is, the fear that they'll break their leg and owe some doctor $10 million. So it's a little bit scarier here for people. They make it scary for people here.
So how does life work for you then? Because as I understand it, like you're working outside of all that system. And at the same time, I mean, it must take so much time and effort to make, you're so constantly productive. But, I think I've read you saying that you don't make your living off those sort of things. So you have to kind of work to get them funded one way or another. Like, is that do you lose sleep at night worrying about, putting food on the table for the family and all that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah. It's a hand to mouth existence. Fortunately, I was born poor, so I'm not afraid of it. I know it. I know what it is. It's part of my life, and it's not it's not a good choice or a bad choice to live like this. The things I do, I'm always interested in. There are benefits to if you make a film and you go to a film festival, you get to see places you would never see before and things like that. And you sometimes stay in 5-star hotels. But you don't make any money doing it, like people, they take care of you and they make things, make life an interesting adventure. But you're always struggling, trying to make ends meet. And other people, they figure out ways of making it work. But there are payoffs, there's prices to pay. Like I know a lot of people who got into making TV advertisements because they said, I'm just going to make this much money. Yeah. And once I'm done, I'm going to make my film. And they never do it.
The golden handcuffs.
Right. And so with me, there's like I said, I was born poor, so it doesn't really, it's no difference for me. I don't care about money really too much. I need it, but I don't really care about it. There are other things that are a lot more important. There's also things that people do that to make money that I just wouldn't be very good at. Like I'm good at doing what I do, and that's why I'm interested in it is, I'm always learning and trying to develop these things that I do. But at the same time, if, I went and tried out for a job doing something that is a cousin to what I do, I don't think I would be too good at it. I've had people send me screenplays that were like commercial screenplays. And I looked at them and they were paying gigs, but I looked at them and I thought I would stink at this. First off, I don't like it. And, but there is somebody in this world who's probably would think this was great and do a really great job at it, So I'm just not cut out for it.
As you're alluding to there, you have a very particular aesthetic and approach to your work. You're probably best known for your films, The American Astronaut and Stingray Sam, and they each have a very distinctive aesthetic that kind of throws back to a series of genres that have largely fallen out of vogue. The serial science fiction, the Western, and musicals, and both projects largely shot in black and white. What led you to that aesthetic?
Well, The American Astronaut, that film, I do everything I don't do everything myself. But when I wrote that, I was doing everything myself. My first animated short was made with house paint on paper in my apartment. And there was a point where for about 3 years, I wasn't living anywhere. I was working in San Francisco and I was running security in nightclubs. And I quit. I quit working in clubs. And then for about 3 years, I was just bouncing around, staying in people's carports and things like that. And filling in from time to time as a doorman at clubs and performing music to, keep going. And while I was doing that, I wrote The American Astronaut. And I wrote it based on the idea that, like, all of the special effects and everything in it were things that I figured I could do myself. I didn't need, an effects team. And so everything was really scaled down. And when I released it, everybody called it a musical space Western. It was a musical, and it takes place in space, but I didn't know where the Western part came from. That was all because aesthetically it was based on my family. But then after that, enjoyed talking about musical space westerns so much, I decided to intentionally write one. So I wrote Stingray Sam, and used a lot of the same ideas that were in the American Astronaut, but took them in opposite directions. And when I wrote the American Astronaut, I was writing it based on my personal experiences. When I wrote Stingray Sam, one of the influences was I was very, bruised and upset after 8 years of the Bush administration. And I was traveling around to different festivals around the world and being a representative of the U.S. in a way. I would go to places where everybody wanted to talk to me about politics. And I didn't really think of myself, as the American guy. When you're just living in America and you never leave, you don't, unless you're one of those kind of guys who, that's your identity, is to, wear a flag as a necktie and things like that. But one time a woman came from Belgium and interviewed me for an arts magazine. And this was right after the U.S. had bombed Iraq. And she said that Europeans were really angry at America because of what our government was doing. She said, but Europeans they enjoy liking American culture. And she said that the American Astronaut had all the things that Europeans still like to love about American culture. And I didn't know what that meant because I'd never traveled at that time. And so when I went out, I started to see things of American culture reflected in other countries, like seeing Dutch rap and, hearing, jazz done in other countries, and all the things which actually came from the poor of America, like rap music, seeing 70s style New York graffiti and things like, everywhere. So so when I wrote the Stingray Sam, I wanted to write something that embraced American culture, but at the same time criticized it. So it used these very simplistic American genres, like, actually the musical is one of them, but, these sort of sappy melodrama, American style melodrama, of the young orphan girl,
Yep.
being some guy coming to rescue her, and also singing cowboys. There was a period in time where, the singing cowboy serial
Yep.
was the biggest thing in the world.
Gene Autry and Roy Rogers and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I took those things, these American products, I guess, and then wrote this science fiction thing, which was a science fiction version of our culture, with, prison systems that are, capitalize on their prisoners, and pharmaceutical companies and all these different horrible, things, and turn them into a science fiction in the same way that early, 60s science fictions like, The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits were responding to the Cold War. And so I did something that I thought was very modern. And I also, it was right when phones were able to show movies, when it was pre-iPhone, and people were able to distribute movies on phones for the first time. So I made it episodic so that it would be an easy download for phones. Now that's not a big deal. I actually made one of the first films that was ever seen on mobile phones. I was commissioned by the GSM Association and the Sundance Film Festival to make one of the first 5 movies that would be broadcast on phones when that was a brand new technology. It was released in 2007 in February.
What was it?
It was called Reno. The Sundance Festival, they said, we're hoping you'll do a musical. So I did this little piece called Reno, and they said, what do you think will work on a 2-inch by 2-inch screen?
I was about to say, how do you say, what's the thinking at that point when you haven't really seen that happen yet?
Yeah, and now, now it's not a new thing, but the screens then were there were a lot of different sizes, but they were just variations of a 2-inch by 2-inch screen. And so I thought, well, all right, well, what are we used to seeing on small screens? We were used to seeing still images, digital cameras have taking pictures and seeing stills that size. Surveillance cameras or surveillance monitors, seeing things really small like that. And also loops. That was the golden age of MySpace, and people had these little loops that they were using to represent themselves in the corners of their pages. So those were the 3 things that I tried to incorporate into this little tiny musical movie, and it turned out really cool. If you'll see Reno, well, you could, I don't know, find it online on. I don't have it on YouTube, but some people posted it. It's on my Vimeo page.
It's interesting when you talk about Stingray Sam coming from that sort of place of anger towards the Bush administration, because you can certainly see how you use in that film, science fiction as satire, which is always when it's sort of it's most powerful. I think one of my favorite parts of doing that in Stingray Sam is where you have the prison system has been rejigged so that the prisoners will make costumes for corporate mascots, and then go out. The prisoners will become the corporate mascots. But interestingly, even coming from that place, what strikes me with a lot of your work and Stingray Sam is that there's a real sense of sort of tenderness and vulnerability to the characters. That I think works. It's really lovely how you sort of managed to kind of juxtapose the kind of high concepts of those settings with these characters who are sort of bumbling their way through in a lot of ways, trying to find their way, and it's very kind of emotionally immediate.
I'm really interested in kindness. I think that's interesting, and there's a lot of films that are very, very kind, that are really strong films. One example, it's an older film. A lot of people don't know it these days, but it's called Harry and Tonto. About an old man who goes on a journey with his cat. It's a road film, and it's really an interesting film. It was a huge film in the 70s. It stars Art Carney, and it's a great portrait of old people, and it's smart and it's kind. Also, like Miyazaki films, I think are very kind.
Yeah.
And they're not they're not styled like Western culture films where you have to humiliate someone. Like the hero has to be humiliated first and then get vengeance, or you have to humiliate the bad guy. When in the Miyazaki films, there's people that are kind of uncool characters, but they end up becoming the person's crew, and they don't have to be beaten up or forgiven for something or humiliated. They just kind of become part of the team, and as who they are. And I think that's really interesting and smart and enjoyable.
You've talked about on the topic of kindness, how you think the message of a film is more in the creation of it than the actual story. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I think the creation infuses the story. Like when I watch the American Astronaut, I'm actually seeing great performances by people who I respect. And those performances. That's the reason I could watch that film 100 times. Is because I'm watching wonderful moments captured as opposed to just trying to fulfill a screenplay. Right now, I'm making a project it's a global collaborative art project. The global collaborative is called Captain Ahabs Motorcycle Club, which I was there performing music for last time in Melbourne. That film is very much, the story is being created through the production itself, in the same way that like a documentary would be, but this is a fantasy film. And what I'm doing is I'm out on the road. I don't have any money and I don't know how to drive. So, people are picking me up and driving me from city to city, and I'm staying in people's homes and paying for it by lecturing at universities. And the story, I have this basic storyline that I was following, but allowing the experiences that happen on the road to change it and rewriting it based on experiences that happen and things that I'm discovering while I'm out there. And it's probably going to take about another year and a half to make this film. I got to go back out again and do some more filming. My part is all taking place on stage and traveling, but my part will be like a third person. The story will be formed around what's happening with me. But once it's done, I'm going to write a final screenplay where actors will come in and play different characters based on what's happening through all the live experiences.
I wanted to ask you about that. So your solo album, Small Star Seminar, is it's kind of part motivational, part defeatist, part ambivalent, part anarchist, which is it's kind of a cross between Tony Robbins and Charles Manson, really. But what was the inspiration for that album?
I don't know, but I'm quoting you. Yeah, it's going up.
That's our one goal is we want to get a pull quote somewhere at some point.
Yep.
You got it. We have one.
But it's like the lyrics are amazing, and like you've put all the lyrics, thankfully, on the player.
Bandcamp?
Thank you, Bandcamp. On Bandcamp, so you can really take them in. Should be a little handbook for motivational speaking. So you're creating this. This is one of your main projects with Captain Ahabs Motorcycle Club. Is creating a film from this album where you're a motivational of sorts speaker. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah. Well, when I started Captain Ahab's Motorcycle Club, I began it in 2012, and the idea was to work together to make to put together an art collaborative, a global art collaborative, and make a feature. And we began with graphic design and music. The graphic design collection's amazing and beautiful, and there's some wonderful stuff from Australia too. Then the music, what I did was just to get the ball rolling, I wrote some songs, put up some recordings of them where people could download the recordings for free and also download each individual track. And then I went out on the road performing and invited people to do their own mixes. And what I told them was, as long as my scratch vocal can fit your track, I should be able to download it that day and perform it on stage that night. And so I went out on the road and toured trying to build Captain Ahab's Motorcycle Club by being out in the real world and off of the computers. And it was a really fun, interesting, wonderful experiment. And toward the end, the shows got really interesting. I would just stand on stage and say, all right, this one comes from Oslo, Norway, from a gentleman, and then the music would begin, and everything sounded so different from one another. And the only thing that was consistent in sound was me standing there singing. So while I was building this, the idea, I had to choose an idea for the story and for the film. And the story that I chose was the story of Abraham Lincoln's embalmer. Abraham Lincoln, when he was assassinated, chemical embalming was very new, and they embalmed him and put him on a train and took him for a tour, for a 2.5-week tour, for these immense, just gigantic events where thousands and thousands of people would come out to every city and walk past his coffin for a close-up look. And he wasn't sitting too pretty. It was pretty rough. So they're being treated like Led Zeppelin on tour, but everybody's crying who's there, and the body's rotting. And this embalmer it's his job. When in New York there was 500,000 people came to see the body. His job is to make sure it stays fresh on this train, And so I thought it was a really interesting story. And the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's assassination was coming up. There were going to be all these Civil War reenactments and funeral reenactments, and somebody was constructing an exact replica of the train to take on tour. And I thought, if you're a guerrilla filmmaker and you want to make a film like this, it's ripe for the picking.
Now's the time, yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't happen. It wasn't happening. And I think the problem was the project wasn't organic to what was happening with Captain Ahab's Motorcycle Club. So in the midst of all that, as the Lincoln thing was becoming apparently a bit of a high hurdle, this festival in Poland, in Wrocław, Poland, contacted me and said, will you come and perform? And they were going to pay me. And as I've said earlier, nobody ever pays me for nothing. I invite it, but it just doesn't happen. So they said they were going to pay me to come out and perform, and they were going to pay me well. And so I thought, well, I can't do Captain Ahab's Motorcycle Club because that's other people's music, and I would feel kind of sleazy going there and, taking a big check for that. So I had 2 months to come up with a brand new show. And so I looked around at what I had, and I had a few instruments, a couple broken ones. I had GarageBand on my computer, this old outdated version of it. And I had a daughter who can sing, and so I spent 2 months putting together from zero to 60 minutes of performing the Small Star Seminar. And to try to write an hour's worth and produce an hour's worth of music in 2 months is really not, I would never try it again. I'm just surprised it worked. But it turned out to be my favorite record that I've ever made. And when I put it out, it had such a diverse reaction. I mean, people's responses were so diverse. At first, these they seemed to be looking at their pages. They were these. They seemed to be really poor Christian music groups from the South started liking it, and then all these Buddhists in New York were coming up to me going, "This is everything I'm studying. This is exactly what I'm studying." And a gentleman on my Bandcamp put up something saying that it's his favorite music because he has a MA and BA in business management, and this is what he's studying. And people were writing to me telling me that it was helping them with their depression, which I thought was, very, it was a surprise. It was like, if you put a record like that together in 2 months, it's like finding a box with a record in it and somebody going, "This is yours. You wrote it." And you're like, "Ooh, I wonder what it sounds like." It's so new. And so then people from Captain Ahab's Motorcycle Club started doing artwork for it just naturally. And I thought, all right, this is our film. This is so diverse in its reactions that we can take it out and watch it unfold,
It's really cool. I love your daughter's name is Willa, is that right?
Yeah.
Willa's vocals on Thunder are particularly great.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Well, the background vocal thing, I've played with bands for so many years. The female background vocal was always something growing up that was like this weird mystery to me. And when you'd hear it on a record, and I always felt just kind of, I don't know, brought down to earth whenever you'd see a live performance and they would bring in the background singers, because you'd hear it like in early, country music, like, Johnny Horton, there'd be these women's voices going, off in the background, or like that woman wailing in the back of Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, or Leonard Cohen's background singers, or surf music, all that stuff. And to me, they were these ethereal beings that had no body. They were just these amazing magic voices. And then you'd see a performance and there'd be, a couple women dressed alike, and had hair choices and figured out some dance moves to, make it work. And it took away the magic to see a human being attached to that. But I can be on stage and have that call and answer, like have this voice coming from these speakers just out of the sky, and have a call and answer with this ethereal, beautifully mixed, perfect little voice,
Loser, that was only thunder.
Did you see the lightning flash?
Loser, that's the spell you're under.
Did you hear the rain fall?
Loser, that was
We should move on to your pick, but before we do, I just have to ask one last question because I just find you such a fascinating filmmaker. I wanted to ask you about your films, in particular, The American Astronaut and Stingray Sam, like such a case of like these really ambitious films in terms of scale and the sort of worlds you want to depict. But as you say, you're creating them in an environment where like you're having to fund them for very little and, finding all that money yourself. And one of the things I really admire about your work is that to me, it seems like you refuse to accept limitations as limitations on the work, but instead turn them into, opportunities to transform the films into something completely new. Like I'm thinking of the use of like photo collage and stuff in American Astronaut to show various what would be special effects shots in other films of the ship moving through space and that sort of stuff. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you kind of negotiate that tension between your initial vision and, the I'm sure very quickly looming budgetary brick wall that's ahead of you? Like it feels like they're the sort of projects that if you sat down to talk to a producer at a first meeting straight away, they'd go, "You can never afford it." Like how do you How do you kind of negotiate that? Like, are you tailoring ideas to fit the budget, or are you just jumping in and trusting you'll find a solution? And how far do you push with an idea before you're willing to surrender that maybe it's unaffordable?
Well, I definitely tailor things to fit the budget. Like I said, earlier, I try to make things something that I can do personally, in my apartment. With the American Astronaut, when you watch, when people get disintegrated, it's somebody throwing a bucket of sand off of a ladder off screen.
And it's such a classic case because, again, like, it's just you turn it into something that gets a laugh, and it's like such a memorable moment, and it comes purely from your limitations in production.
Yeah, and when the space scenes where you're talking about, the montage scenes, those are paintings. I did half of them, and my friend Jeff Tuttle did the other half because we had a really limited amount of time. We had to come up with 50 paintings of spaceships crashing into asteroids and stuff. Those were originally those were going to be model shots, but we did some tests and they looked like model shots, and and they looked a little bit. And there were people who gave us their reels saying, we can do computer animation. And the problem is, it would look like everything else, and there's so much stuff involved with computer animation where you're, like, you'd be competing with the best of the times, or making something intentionally campy. And same with the model shots. The model shots, they rang of, of old, poorly done sci-fi films, and because the film was so different, if you tip the scale like that, and suddenly have these campy, model shots with, a fake ship running into styrofoam balls, and stuff like that, suddenly the film becomes stupid, and any doubt is swept away. So I had to think, all right, well, what is our outer space look like, And so I thought, well, doing these paintings would probably be the best way to do it, and do it as still images, and doing the paintings, white paint on black. There was, and I also made the surfaces of the canvases really rough. So there was sort of a gritty chalkboard kind of effect to them because I thought it best fit the production design. And, it was much easier. It looked better. It was delightful to see as opposed to, playing on somebody's preconceived ideas about what model shots or bad computer animation look like,
Yeah.
So it became its own thing. Also in Stingray Sam, I could go anywhere and create any story I wanted going into it, knowing I was going to do collages. My friend John Baruso did those collages. They're fantastic. What he did, and like you said earlier, it's a black and white film. It's actually only half black and white. The live action is black and white. The collages are all in color, and the photography is in color. By doing it in collages, you can do anything. You can tell any story you want because you don't have to adhere to, creating these sets. As to where what happened with the live action in Stingray Sam was very simple. They walk into a room, you find out what the dilemma is, and then suddenly the entire story unfolds, being told to you by a narrator with these collages. And also the special effects in Stingray Sam 2 were very simple, and I think they turned out great. Like that little robot was a digital camera strapped to the back of my hand, and those are my fingers for the legs. And I had a green piece of paper up my arm, So what I would do is I would act out the facial part, and then as that played, I would act it out with my fingers, as the video played on the back of my hand. And it was great because it caught light in certain ways, and it has sort of I don't know. I think it's amazing looking. It looks a little bit the way it catches the light. To me, it always reminded me of the crystal ball in The Wizard of Oz when she's trapped in the witch's castle. It has that certain kind of antique look to it.
That is brilliant that you did that. Now, Cory, we could talk to you about your work forever, but we are here to talk about someone or something that you're a big fan of. So who or what have you chosen for us to talk about?
Dennis Potter.
So for those who aren't familiar with Dennis Potter, who is he?
Dennis Potter was a writer. He was a screenwriter. He wrote for British television. He also wrote other. He wrote films as well, but began in television and just made some of the most amazing stories. And the way he told the stories and the interesting choices he made actually inspired me to become a filmmaker.
So his sort of golden age of production would be probably across the 70s and 80s, and he's probably best known for series such as Pennies from Heaven and particularly The Singing Detective. It's probably the one above all else that people know him for. How did you first come across him?
I first discovered him in the early 80s. They did a feature film version of Pennies from Heaven with Steve Martin and Bernadette Peters, and it's probably Christopher Walken's greatest moment on screen, or one of them, but it's his greatest dancing moment. I think it was in 1981 Pennies from Heaven came out, and it was kind of a flop because that was at the height of Steve Martin's Wild and Crazy Guy period, and people who went to see that Pennies from Heaven thought they were going to see some goofy Steve Martin film, and they marketed it as such. They're like, Steve Martin is back, and they made it look like a silly film, but it's not. It's a really smart film, and it's it's very dark, and I think the people that it was marketed at weren't going to like it, and the people that it was meant, the audience that would have appreciated it thought it was going to be a goofy Steve Martin film.
So they didn't go see it.
Right.
So it's interesting that so your first exposure to Potter is of an adaptation of his original work, although I believe he did actually write that American adaptation. The original TV series of Pennies for Heaven was also famous for being Bob Hoskins' first sort of notable role in that same part that Steve Martin later played. So you mentioned that he was a profound influence on your career. How so?
Well, the film version was there. There were some scenes in there that just made me want to make musicals. It showed me that music can be used differently. I mean, I always equate musicals with those Gene Kelly musicals that really weren't my thing. American in Paris, the big dancing scenes with all the scarves and things like that. It's not something that, a young suburban kid was going to gravitate toward. And of course, during the 70s, that was actually a period, and I never thought about this till I got older. I always thought of musicals as being these old films. But during the 70s, musicals were diverse. There was a lot of things going on in making musicals. There was The Who's Tommy, Cabaret, Bob Fosse's Cabaret, Rocky Horror Picture Show, Phantom of the Paradise, Jesus Christ Superstar. There was a lot of musicals happening at that period in time, but for some reason I had it in my mind that they were all these, antique things. So I saw Pennies from Heaven, and it just blew my mind. And one scene in particular is the scene where the homeless man sings the song Pennies from Heaven. In the film version, it's one of the most amazing scenes. It's surreal, and it's beautiful, and it's huge, and he's dancing on this massive stage with these this collage of pictures of homeless people behind him on this gigantic wall with these golden pennies raining down on him while he dances, and it's beautiful. It's such an amazing scene, and I thought, all right, anything is possible.
So when you hear it thunder, don't run under a tree. There'll be pennies from heaven for you and me.
Interestingly, Potter said, so you indeed did obviously go on to make these films that made prominent use of music, much like Potter did throughout his career. He interestingly said he wasn't interested in making a musical. In a musical, the action builds to a song and the song caps it and then it moves on. Do you consider your films to be musicals?
Yeah, but I consider some films to be musicals that nobody would consider to be.
Well, I guess maybe a more interesting question is, in what way do you think your musicals are different from other musicals? Or to put it another way, why does my partner Marion over here love your musicals but hate virtually any other musical without exception, do you think?
Oh, well, do you like Dennis Potter?
No, no, that's not true. I like The Singing Detective, but I don't like when the songs are happening. But Pennies from Heaven, I just really didn't.
It is
like.
a very different style, though. We have to. We may as well talk about now because those musical numbers are done in the Potter series as lip syncing rather than actual singing. So I guess that is a different aesthetic than most musicals.
And do you know, Cory? Lucas asked me why I think I like your stuff more than and hate every other musical, and I kind of explained it as in traditional kind of musical films and stuff like Hollywood musicals, the song is reiterating the narrative. So someone will be like, that guy's really sad. And then a bunch of people will be like, he's so sad. He's really sad. Is he really sad? He's so very sad. And you know exactly what the next note is. You can predict every note and like when the song's going to stop and all that kind of stuff. Whereas with yours, the songs are so punchy and new and strange, and they build on the narrative. They're pushing the story along and giving you something fresh.
Well, actually, when I saw Pennies from Heaven, I thought, basically that just said to me, you can make a musical that's not a musical. And when I started writing, I wasn't trying to copy Dennis Potter or anything I had seen. I was actually thinking I want to make something that I haven't seen before.
And indeed, your tone is quite different. I mean, his work is very angry. As much as you said before that, Stingray Sam came from a place of anger about where the States was at that point in time, Potter's work is full of, the characters almost spit at times. Whereas, as I was saying before, I feel like your work comes from a place of much more seeking a connection and tenderness.
Well, thanks. I think you should watch all of the Singing Detective series. Get through to the end, and you'll find the kindness in it.
He builds up to it.
It does, and his first, the first episode is, it's an introduction.
He's not. I don't mean to say it's an unlikable character. I just mean there's a lot of anger about the system and
anti-establishment.
His plight in life, and as Potter himself. I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point. He was a very political person. He originally, one of the fascinating things about him is that, one of the geniuses of the medium ended up in the profession by accident. He was originally like a politician, but he came down with this particular kind of psoriasis that meant that he walked with a cane and couldn't stand up for long periods, and so there were only certain kinds of jobs he could do, and so almost obviously he must have had some quite extraordinary level of natural ability and inclination to do it, but in that respect, in terms of practicality, he kind of almost fell into that as a job. But that kind of fire for society, and he was somebody who, as I understand it, built himself up from a very working class background, and to a place of riches and significance, and so he never left that behind, and I think that really comes through in his work, that kind of anger at the establishment.
Well, the growing up in a coal mining town, that's all through the Singing Detective. Have you watched his final interview, the interview he gave before when he had cancer?
Yeah, I actually listened to it today. The fascinating thing, this is on YouTube, and we'll put it up on our Facebook page. It's Potter died of cancer in, I think it's 1994, and he records this 1 hour interview with Melvin Bragg 3 months before he died. That's just. It leaves you a bit speechless.
It's an amazing interview. It's something that you are learning so much from it, but ultimately it's a man lamenting the fact that he is going to die. And, it's a very powerful.
Even when you say lamenting, though, it's interesting because there's so many insights there. He talks about, living in the now and this perspective he suddenly has that he never had before. And he's clearly in incredible pain. He's having this cocktail of morphine and champagne to sort of, to control his pain throughout the interview. And he talks a lot about that, like, again, talk about a man driven by his art. He wanted to do, well, two things. Wanted to write to the end, and he was trying to finish these two projects, and talks about trying to, what would the word be, find a level for his medication so that it can control his pain enough that he can write, but won't deaden him so much so that he can't write. And he did that, and he took care of his wife of, some decades, who was sick herself, I think, with breast cancer.
And she died just
She died 9 days. He died 9 days after she did, which is, wow. But yeah, I think it's sort of just so interesting in terms of what he says about how it's changing his perspective living there, living with that knowledge.
Yeah, he that interview, I find it really inspiring, because when he found out he had cancer, he was writing a series, not just a 90-minute piece, but a series called Karaoke. And then when he found out he was going to have, you've seen this, but we'll say this for our friends out there. When he found out he wasn't going to live, he decided he didn't want karaoke to be the last thing that he made. And so he came up with this concept called Cold Lazarus. Yeah, Cold Lazarus. And Cold Lazarus takes the character from Karaoke, and what happens is the character from Karaoke in Cold Lazarus, passed away 1,000 years before, and they froze his head. And so they're able to thaw out his head, 1,000 years from now, and they give it to the networks because they're able to transmit his memories and his thoughts. And so, here it is 1,000 years. They're having the memories of a 20th century man walking by a lake and, living a 20th century lovely life. And that becomes national entertainment. And so the head is still alive, and all it knows is it just wants to be dead. And so he's writing these two simultaneous mini-series with 3 months left to live. And his goal is to finish both of these at the same time, and to get the BBC and Channel 4, I believe, to show them in sync with each other.
Yeah, that's the other fascinating thing, not just the creative dedication, as you say, because he says at one point during that interview he's writing 10 pages a day while on morphine to control the pain of a cancer and still his psoriasis of like his skin literally eating away at him. But yeah, like again, political to the end, that he kind of used his plight to try to broker this deal where the two main television competitors in the UK at that time, the main public broadcaster, government broadcaster, and the main commercial broadcaster, would effectively have to work together, or would choose to work together to share the broadcasting of this project. It's fascinating that
and they did it.
He did it, and a testament to him and his influence, cultural influence, that they did do it.
Yeah, I see all that, not just writing it, but playing a diplomat between two TV stations while he's going through all that, and, I'm here, the bell rings. I'm like, I'll have to get up, Yeah. It's going to get milk at the corner store. It's like, I got to schedule it, it's a big deal. I got nothing to complain about, I tell you.
Let's go back to when we were talking about the musical element before. We talked about lip syncing. It's one of the more so. Potter broke a lot of conventions in the way that he wrote his projects, and one of the most notable ones that people might be aware of was his use of lip synced music in a lot of his projects. So characters would turn and would sing, but they're singing to clearly pre-recorded the original source tracks, often 30s or 40s track that the characters are singing along to, which, as Marion was getting at before, can be a bit of an odd thing to see for the first time. What do you make of that as a device?
Well, I thought it was I I thought it really worked. And some at first, like in The Singing Detective, the first time it happens, it seems a little bit goofy. And what's happening in The Singing Detective is this character is suffering from the same thing that he suffered from. He's got third-degree psoriasis all over his body, and his joints are frozen. And so they have him on heavy medication. He's got fevers. He's stuck in this bed in this ward of other men, and there's this, dull drama going on just of hospital life. So to try to keep his sanity, he's trying to rewrite his and tell himself and rewrite his detective novel called The Singing Detective. But at the same time, he keeps slipping into these ideas that his wife might be cheating on him, about his, living in a coal mining town, about his mother cheating on his father, and just all this different stuff just starts to circulate around and become the same hallucination. And while that's happening, he ends up going through these memories, these horrible, guilty memories, and having to deal with them, because there's also a psychiatrist that he visits, that he's forced to visit while he's going through all this. It's interesting. It grows and grows and grows and grows, and by the time it's over, it's just it's a masterpiece.
It's interesting because Potter's style is so very British. The language, the characters, everything about it is really British. And but he's doing something really original, but in that British way. And I feel like you've been influenced by what he's done, but you have done something really original with a very American aesthetic. So earlier on, when you were saying that you were shocked that the woman was saying that your work was so very American, and you didn't sort of know why they thought it was Western or particularly Western or whatever. But I think, and maybe it's because we're outside of America, but it definitely, all your work has a really Americana kind of thing about it, and it could just be the cowboy hat, to be honest. But
I had to leave America to find that out. I didn't travel when I was young. Film brought me around and showed me the world. Film festivals did. So, but now I understand it. But when I first heard it, I didn't understand it. By the way, the Pennies from Heaven feature film with Steve Martin, to me, is the only good film adaptation of his miniseries. But one thing they did was they created an Americanized version of that screenplay. Because when you watch the series, it's totally British. But then when you watch the American one, they changed it. Both countries were having a depression at the time. They made it an American depression. And that was something that I found really interesting about that film too, was when you watch the series, they would do something very simple, like as the music would start, they'd drop the needle and somebody would just very subtly change their position of their body and then start singing and then, go back to normal. When you watch the feature film, there's elements where it's a really depressing story, and they're using escapism music from the Depression to create these surrealistic moments within it. And they snap back and forth in different ways. Like when the Christopher Walken scene, he's talking to Bernadette Peters. She's was a school teacher. She got pregnant. She lost her job. Now and her family kicked her out. She goes into a bar and she's, starving and flirting with the idea of prostitution. And Christopher Walken is this sleazy character named Tom who comes up and starts talking to her. And he bursts into this big song and dance number. It's an amazing performance. And the lights are on and everybody's singing. And he's like, we're all alone, no chaperone. And he's tap dancing on the bar and comes up and he's got his clothes off by the end of it and then stops right in front of her. And then it cuts back and the lights are still dark. He still has his clothes on. He goes, you're not a tease, are you? And she goes, a tease? And he goes, because if you're a tease, I'll cut your face. No. So it uses those musical moments. It like I said, the British ones, it's just a change of posturing, which works. It's like magic. But with this, it's this overall dip you in the hot and cold like crazy. It's really an amazing piece.
When you talk about how depressing Pennies from Heaven is as a story, that was actually one of the things I took from the choice to do lip syncing that I don't know whether it was the intention or not, but it seemed to me that so much of Pennies from Heaven seemed to be about fantasizing of escape from this kind of depressing everyday. The wife fantasizes about sort of escape into beautiful celebrity, and he fantasizes about escape into the sort of the romance of the music. But it was kind of a reflection of how little that they have to me, that because it was lip syncing rather than actual singing, even their fantasies were pretend rather than this truth swelling up from inside them.
Yeah, it seems like such a simple device, but it really opened up a lot of, it opens up a lot of conversation. It's a wonderful, I'm a huge fan of his, and I've seen a couple of his series. I saw Pennies from Heaven, the series. I've seen that a couple of times. I've seen The Singing Detective a few times. Lipstick on Your Collar is a wonderful one. Ewan McGregor, he was very young in it.
I think that's his first role, isn't it?
Was it?
I think I read that that's his first role.
Yeah, him and Bob Hoskins.
But it didn't do very well.
I don't know why. There's that. He also did some films that, I think it won an Academy Award. Gorky Park. He wrote the screenplay for Gorky Park. He also did one which I think is a really interesting film. You can't find it anywhere around here, called Dream Child.
If our listeners were going to try dipping their toe into some of Potter's work, what is your pick of the work that they should first look at?
I would have two, if that's okay.
That's okay.
For feature films, I don't think they've been able to make a good feature film of his series, but except for Pennies from Heaven. Pennies from Heaven, if you're looking for a feature, totally go for it. If you want to watch a miniseries, it would be The Singing Detective.
Awesome. Cory, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to have you on and have a chat.
Oh, thanks for having me. Oh, one last thing too. If you just want to watch something on YouTube and see something incredible and inspiring and amazing, watch his final interview.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll put that up on our Facebook page. What's next for you?
I'm going to go back out. I'm going to keep working on the Small Star Seminar film. Oh, by the way, you can find out stuff about all this stuff at CoryMcAbee.net, if that's okay to put that out there.
That's all right, mate. That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, or you can find it. It actually goes to the same place. You can go to CoryMcAbee.net, SmallStarSeminar.net, SmallStarCorp.net. They all roads lead to Rome there.
Excellent. And you can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Devotee Podcast, or email us at devoteepodcast@gmail.com.
So we're going to be posting links to all of Cory's stuff and some
including
Dennis Potter
Fredwood.
stuff.
I can't believe we've gone a whole interview. I don't know if you ever heard the previous episode when our friend, the comedian Damien Lawler, came on to want to talk about you. But
it was I can't believe
we spoke for so long about Fredwood, and we haven't even brought up how the hell did this work of genius come about?
It's an amazing song, and we're going to post it on our Facebook page. And over the next few weeks, we'll post lots of stuff. So make sure you check it out. And till we meet back here next month, when another of our favorite creators will drop by to nominate their favorite thing, and we'll do it all again. Thanks very much, Cory McAbee.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both for having me on your show. This has been a great way to start the day.
It's our pleasure. It's a service we provide. All right, till next time, everybody. We'll see you later. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.